Hey guys, what's going on? Shaw here, and today we are going to just walk through a Theater of Pain. My last one that I did on this was Necrotic Wake. I'll probably have a link up in this corner here if you'd like to see that and my breakdown on my thoughts in that key. But I got pretty good feedback, so I'm going to do it again for our Theater 21. This was the following week, or the week of recording this, which was Inspiring, Grievous, Fortified, and of course the new affix Encrypted. This was a pretty tough key. It's not played perfectly at all. I think we ended the key with 9 deaths. We had 2 minutes left on the timer. It was timed, but I want to walk through some of the pulls, some of the challenges in this key, and then I kind of want to, whenever there's like downtime, I'll talk about my thoughts on the different tier sets between the tanks, because a lot of things that I'm hearing right now is that Guardian Druid's crazy broken. But if you look at the data and you look at what classes are timing the highest keys and which 4 sets and 2 sets are, and double Lego setups are actually performing very well, Guardian Druid isn't necessarily up there compared to the other tanks. So I think the data is a little skewed, so I'll probably talk about all of that in this video just as the video plays. So we'll just dive right in. So pull timer goes out. The one thing I want to mention really quick though is our comp. We are running a Frost Death Knight, a Fury Warrior, a Resto Druid, and a Shadow Priest. Of course, I'm on my Guardian Druid. I do have 4 set, so the damage, the reason we're able to meet some of the damage checks in here is simply because I have 4 set. Our Frost DK also has 4 set. Our Fury Warrior has 2 set still. Our Resto Druid has 0 set, and our Shadow Priest, I think if I'm not mistaken, had 2 set in this key. So, half 4 set, half 2 set, Resto Druid had nothing. So what we're doing at the start of this key is we're going in full force. We're just pulling in the Bloodhorn. We skipped past the first pull. There's a few reasons for that. It was inspired, so if we brought it in, we would be able to, we would be able to cleave it down. But if we brought it in, we wouldn't be able to kick. We could have like MC'd it. We could have probably got like a root on it for the start of the fight until later on, and then brought it in later to cleave it down. But we opted in to pull it at the end of the dungeon when we were waiting for like more Dretha to do RP. So that was kind of our plan here. Our Resto Druid is watching the Bloodhorn at the start of pull, while the rest of us DPS focus on making sure that is dying, making sure that we're getting our kicks. So we're just dividing up the roles there, which is something that I always recommend you do if you're in Discord or you're pushing with the group, is that when things like that happen, don't make it that the Resto Druid has everything on their plate, or the tank has everything on their plate, or a certain DPS has everything on their plate. Try to divvy up the roles so it's less hectic from, less hectic for the most amount of people. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I just kind of rolled out of bed if you couldn't tell. Wearing my blanket. So first boss is pretty easy on Fort Weeks. This one didn't give us as much of a challenge as Xav, Gorechop, and Mr. Koltharok gave us. So this fight's mostly just about making sure you kick as often as possible to help your tank stay alive and DPS stay alive. And then Desia is typically the primary target if your group doesn't have a Soothe. If your group does have a Soothe, Sathor or Pakran are fine. Pakran's more annoying because he ports around the room. Sathor's more annoying because he's hard to move sometimes, especially once he has his like empowered effect and he can't be kicked. He just sometimes will sit in the poop if you're dropping it there. So it really depends on what your group comp is. We like to target Desia regardless because it adds a lot of tank damage that once Desia dies, if you are playing like a Resto Affinity or you're playing a different kind of tank, you can typically spend a little bit more time off healing, helping people get out of Grievous, helping top people up, making sure you're getting CC on Zera. There's a lot of different reasons why we like to target Desia first, but that is my group's reasons. I'm putting down a marker here just so when we go back up later, I remember that the mobs are there. Because sometimes I go up and I just forget, and then I pull boss. I'm like, oh yay, key's over, and then it's like, oh, you still have a trash pull left to do. Going into, we do a few different things in this dungeon. Sometimes when we run theater, what we do is we end up actually going into Gorechop's wing first, which is the Borrow of Carnage, and we'll do like a mega big trash pull in there. But because of how works, because it's fortified and bosses are dying pretty fast, we opted to actually just go into this room to get our first, another relic. Our Shadow Priest did go down there really quickly. You have to be careful with this pull on Fortified Weeks because the Arbalists do so much damage. And Sometimes it just comes down to RNG. I think DPS could be pretty aggressive with using cooldowns in this wing. He didn't use Dispersion at all there. Or no, yeah, he didn't use Dispersion, but then he used Dispersion speed to get back to this room. Because if you are rolling dice and you're trying to figure out, what the ability is going to go on, for example, the jagged coral that they do, which is the bigger hit, the less people you have, the higher chance it's going to go on the same person if there's, 2 Arbalests or 3 Arbalests and different pulls in here. So getting back to this room if you have a death is like the #1 priority for that DPS player. We decided not to use the battle res just because the res is right outside. So I kind of want to talk about how you can choose these mini bosses. There have been supposed ways you can choose by moving in at a certain point across a threshold. I would like to pretend that I know what that is, but I don't. I have a general idea, but it's so finicky, and you have to move in at like if it is true, assuming that it is, you have to move in at like the exact second. And I don't do that perfectly. We got lucky. I would say we got more or less lucky in here because we got the 3 mini bosses that are easiest. The other guy, I forgot what his name is. So you have Dokig, and then the other guy does. He interrupts your casters, which does massive group damage. And if your healer's caught off guard by that, on a Grievous week, probably going to have deaths there. Harugia is the better one here as well, because you can actually have line of sight this mechanic, the ricocheting blade. You can LOS, if you see here, I'm not using an editor or anything, I'm just had this video pulled up. You can line of sight on the spike here, or you can line of sight up at the top of the stairs if you'd like. We found that the top of the stairs is a little bit weird. It's better for like goblins and Vulpira, gnomes and dwarfs to go up there because you can actually just back up to line of sight because of just how hitboxes work. But if you're a taller class, like a Tauren or a Troll or something like that, it's better if you use the spike down at the bottom of the stairs. But essentially what we're doing is we're just line of sighting the ricocheting blade because it does a massive amount of damage. I think a few happen to get off, but it's like not a big deal if they're spread out. But when it's back to back to back and you're cleaving other people, it just gets really rough. And they typically she'll typically cast the ricocheting blade and then she'll charge a range right afterwards. That's the reason why a lot of people like to play downstairs at the pillar, is because the charge will be less, a smaller distance. So then you can actually have better uptime as melee. But it's not too big of a deal here because our melee are pretty fast. Shorter classes, obviously, or shorter races, I should say, can line of sight pretty easily at the top of the stairs. Battle Trance needs to be kicked. If it gets off, it's a pretty big enrage. You just want to make sure that you soothe it if you're a Guardian Druid. If you don't have a soothe in your group, just start rolling cooldowns because it's going to start hurting a lot. I traded our Druid an Invis Flask. This pull, it's very scary to just stealth by without a rogue distract, because the distance between the wall and the mob is so tight that the chance that they're going to see you as a cat is very, very high. I think rogues have a better stealth, if I'm not mistaken, like, unless they changed this, but back in the day, like, feral/cat stealth was weaker than rogue stealth. So what we end up just doing there is we say, fuck our pots, just everyone invis, regardless if you can stealth or not. So that's what we did there, and that's why I was trading him one. And then Wreck is significantly easier than the other one who casts a shield and the ricocheting blade. Wreck, where was I? Wreck the Hardened is a much easier to deal with. Swift Strikes does split damage among your group. As you can see, it hit Deco, ZNT, then Deco, so our Priest, DK, then Priest again. The ricocheting blade has a chance to cleave if you're not line of sighting it. You can LOS it around this corner, but that's only on the other mob. Again, I forgot the name. I'm too lazy to look it up. Wreck the Hardened, though, is going to be a much better play. The Whirlwind is pretty easy, just obviously move out of it, so uptime is going to be a little bit better, especially for casters on this guy. So if you have a heavier caster comp, definitely want to choose this one. After that, that's pretty much it. So at this point, it seems like we've skipped a lot of trash. We're only at 29% going into Xav, but we're going to make up some of the percent later, as you'll see later in the dungeon. Relic is going to be the play here. You have to be careful. I'm going to point this out in a second. So the Relic is good because it gives, classes that are rotational based, an easier time. Like for example, warriors can spam execute, DHs can spam like I-beam and glaive and stuff like that. But the heal on this fight can be kind of troll because if people are down in the arena, that heal is going to go off. So when dies at the end of the fight, it starts healing our priest up, and they can't come back up for a couple seconds. So that's kind of goofy. This fight for a healer POV slash like tank POV is that it's mostly tank damage, and then the big burst of damage will be whenever he does his Might of Maldraxxus, and that's when you want to use your defensives. So here, as you can see, we take a very big hit, but as long as you're avoiding the AoEs, the different like cones and frontals, it's pretty easy. You'll see that I actually end up topping the healing meter on this fight, I think, at the end, just because I run Resto Affinity. I know that's not a popular choice for a lot of Guardian Druids. I don't spend a lot of time weaving, especially with how powerful Venthyr tier set Incarns are. So Resto Affinity is something that I like to use to just help top our groups. It's especially good in this dungeon because there's a lot of windows on a lot of boss fights where you can actually spend time doing that. You can see me here, I'm just weaving in and out of form. I'm making sure that I am staying near melee range because I have my Incarn buff up, which is radiating damage, which is from the 4 set, as well as applying rejubes to help off heal. As you can see, I'm at 6k HPS, our Resto is only at 5k. It's just, if I can spend the time keeping people alive, the Resto Druid can also then do more damage and not worry about so much about his mana, because Grievous Week is extremely painful, especially for classes like Resto Druids that don't have as many on-demand heals. This fight's pretty easy though, just this back and forth, kill banner, dodge frontals. If you're not in a pug group and you're like in a pre-made and you're in voice, when you guys are sent down as DPS, I recommend figuring out as your grip, just be like, hey, I have cooldowns, hey, I don't have cooldowns, kill me. It makes it so much easier. You want your DPS to come back up right away because these oppressive banners need to die. Obviously, it's pretty easy with 4 sets and on Fortified Week that they die pretty quickly, but on higher Tyrannical weeks, if they don't die, most likely they're still going to be up, someone's going to get hit by a slam, and the key's probably going to get burnt pretty quickly on Xav, which is never the place you want to burn the key on. You never want to burn a key, but definitely not the place to do it. After Xav, I typically like to go to Gorechop's Wing. I know a lot of different tanks have different routes through here. That's why I like this dungeon. This week I hate it because Inspiring is horrible in this place, but what I like about this place, this dungeon in particular, is that you have options. You can pick and choose your routes based on comp, based on, preference, based on cooldowns, based on where you want lust at. The only complaint I have is a lot of times you can't get very effective big trash pulls in this place, which means that a lot of certain classes DPS cooldowns aren't as impactful. Like Boomkin comes to mind. Starfall's obviously uncapped. It's a 40-yard range. Venthyr, like Boomkin ramp, is insanely strong, but not when you can only pull 3 or 4 mobs at a time. So we actually shackle this mob in here, and then I call for MC from the DK. Frost DKs don't lose anything from MCing. I think if you're unholy, you have to dismiss your pet, and your ghoul as an unholy DK is going to just typically yield more damage. Unholy DKs haven't been able to really take pets and have it benefit them since like BFA. Correct me if I'm wrong if you're an unholy DK or a DK in the comments, but I think unholy DKs prefer not to MC, but should MC if they can. Frost DKs though don't really care, and the reason we MC it or mind control from our DK is because it will no longer be inspired, or it'll no longer affect the mobs because it's no longer an ally. It's an enemy to the mobs. It's friendly to us. Though, just in case you're wondering, it doesn't give us the inspiring buff. Like, it doesn't mean that we can't get kicked by things like uninterrupting shout and stuff like that, or interrupting shout. We call for a release just because we want to make sure that it gets down before we do the next pull. But typically, every time we go into a pull, the DK is probably going to just MC. It's not as effective for damage, but if your group isn't super well coordinated with like spacing mobs out enough to get CCs and kicks when you need to, this is a wing that will pretty much wipe your group out completely. Before this key, I think we had one theater key, and it was our Shadow Priest key, and he was like, oh, we can do my theater, and I was like, nope, never going into theater again, because I already ran this key like 4 or 5 times this week, and I failed every single key. We do a Necrotic Wake, and my Necrotic Wake, it turns into a 21 theater, and then our entire group rerolls keys, and they all go to theater. So we were basically forced to do this key, essentially. And it was just my luck saying like, oh, I'm never running theater again. We do one Necrotic Wake, and then all our keys turn to theater. Pretty incredible, actually. They weren't great keys though. I think we had like, I forgot what we had. We had a bunch of like spires and stuff, and we didn't need spires anymore. So like we were just trying to reroll, and we all rerolled theater. So like I said, this pull's not effective. It's one target, but we would rather play it safe. We're ahead of the timer. Our damage is looking good. We're at 15.4, 13.2, 10.8, and then 9.7 overall with pretty smaller pulls. Our Shadow Priest definitely gets cucked in this key, but our Shadow Priest is really here to control dispels, you know, disease dispels, get the soothes, get the purges, get the MDs. The Shadow Priest, despite being lower on the meters, actually was one of the bigger reasons why we actually were able to time the key, so Deco did a great job in this one. Once he has Foresight, he'll start pumping a lot more, but it's just kind of in a weird spot right now. DK takes the Diseased Horror, and now we're just going to handle this as a 4-pack. Like I mentioned, we've already ran Theater several times this week at this point. Not on a 21, we've ran like 20s, 19s, 17s, you know, lower keys. And we've had a lot of issues in this wing. So our ideology coming in here was just, let's take it slow. As long as we're ahead of the timer and we're feeling comfortable, let's just, you know, pull as we feel like we need to. So this is a lot slower than my group normally goes through here. We typically double and triple some of these pulls up. We have kick assignments, but here we're just like, we don't have CDs. We're just going to pull the gas bag. We're going to solo down the horror. We're going to pull the gas bag in once he gets closer. But once we have the gas bag, we're going to solo it. And then just like, spoiler, we're going to then pull everything into the boss and have probably the worst Gorechop attempt. We kill it, but it's like the worst execution of Gorechop I think I've ever made. Like even on beta, when I was first testing these dungeons and the Gorechop hooks, pretty much hooked you no matter what. I think we get hooked more in this than on beta when the hooks are broken. And you'll see in a sec, I'll point them out. I think everyone gets hooked at least twice, including myself, and I normally never get hooked because the tank has an easy time putting the boss in the proper position. The tank typically doesn't get gripped in. It can be a little disorienting for a range player if you're like 20 yards out, and then you get gripped in and like you have to run then backwards. I've seen a lot of range typically get hit by it, but having everyone in your group multiple times over the course of a fight get hit by it is pretty crazy. Gas bags are really scary. If you look at the HPS, our Resto Druid has to do 11k, and that's after the fact we did an easier pull. We chained this, so it's been one pull. His HPS is just growing and growing and growing. He ended that pull at 11.5. That's not the craziest thing in the world, but to think that we did a smaller pull before that and chained meant that he had to climb from like 6k up to 11 over the duration of that. So why I stopped there for a second was because our DK was MCing. We just wanted to make sure everything was under control before we just go into boss and, you know, shit gets lost. I make a call out, everyone focus her, don't worry about anything else. If a kick gets off, whatever, don't worry about meat shield. Just make sure that we are staying alive. So right off the bat, I call out grip. We move away from the chains, get into the safe gap, and then as soon as those chains pass, we are strafing left, dodging the force slam. I will just say this again, I think I said in the Necrotic Wake video, but some bosses with is really annoying. So if you're ever a melee DPS or a range DPS and you're like annoyed by where is being moved to or the boss is being moved to, just know that with a frontal slam that stuns as well as a tank buster mechanic, it's not the easiest thing for a tank to handle. So just like let the tank get situated and make sure that he stays alive, because if the tank dies, you're all dead pretty much. So right now we are just cleaving down the horror. We still have the withering discharge, the I forgot what they're called, the diseased whatever, I don't remember. We have it still MC'd. We're waiting until the horror dies before we actually let go of the MC, because once you let go of the MC, there's a thing called like mind control aggro, which typically happens for 8 seconds after an MC is let go. Is that mob is just angry at whichever player controlled them, and you can taunt off, but it'll only last for the duration of the taunt, which is 1.5 seconds. Here was that first hook. I thought I was out of it. I wasn't. But MC aggro is a real thing. So in high keys like this, or higher keys, priests and DKs who do this need to be extremely careful, and you have to be fairly coordinated. Like I have to basically spam taunts when this happens. What's really nice about the new tier set, at least the 2 set for Bear, is because you have more uptime on Incarn, you can essentially pop Barkskin and then spam taunt. So MC aggro doesn't exist when you can do stuff like that. I can't remember. We do have a death on this fight. I think it's our Resto Druid. I don't know if it's here or a little bit later. I think he survives here, but then later in the fight has some issues. So one thing you can do on this fight, if you're running Mass Entanglement, or if you're a class who can CC Undead, you can actually shackle or root these guys right when they spawn, and then you don't have to deal with it. That's mainly the reason why our Resto Druid died here, is because he had Grievous and he was being leapt on over and over again by these leftovers, these extra mobs. It's something that I could have done better here. I could have CC'd. Oftentimes I'm playing with a Frost Mage, which means that we want funnel damage into boss. So if you're playing like this kind of comp and you don't necessarily have a lot of funnel damage, it's just mostly cleave from Frost DK and Fury Warrior, you could probably CC to help keep your group alive. In my last time I did like went over a key, I think it was just an 18 or 19 from last season. I talked about this fight and like tips you can do on the mechanic. Here's another time I got stunned. Don't know why there. I just spaced out. I play this like shit. But like I was saying, I went over this fight more in detail. I'll eventually get to a boss guide on this, but just a helpful tip. CC the adds if you don't need them for funnel, because they add group damage, which on Grievous weeks especially get pretty scary. So that fight goes down after 3 minutes. To be fair, it was pretty hectic at the start. We had a lot of extra adds that we brought in and damage we had to get done, and we had a death, but not too shabby, I would say, outside of like the 19 people who got hooked. All right, and then this next pull goes to shit pretty quick. I messed up and I accidentally pulled like the entire hallway. You can typically pull the entire hallway if you have CC and it's not inspiring. We don't have a lot of AoE CC, and yeah, it's inspiring. You can see the inspired mob there. For some reason, I went out here, I grabbed Incarn, or I popped Incarn, and then I don't know what I did. I think I tagged something or taunted something that was further down the bridge, and it just aggroed everything. So we ended up clearing the entire bridge, but we sacrificed, I think, 4 people here to it. Priest died immediately because he life gripped me, so he was in line of sight, and he was targeted by a couple of Bind Souls. Our DK then died following because, like I said earlier about the dice rolling, if there's only 4 people compared to 5, the chances it's going to go on one person is going to be higher. Just obviously probability. And then our Resto Druid ended up dying, and he's doing, you know, I think he peaked at 17k HPS. I'm doing 12k HPS. Really scary pull. Don't do that unless you're like very controlled. I used to do the whole bridge with like a Windwalker in my group and stuff, but not when you don't have that and it's inspiring. So we're gonna handle these 3 mobs by themselves. I'm just giving a little bit of cooldown recovery to our Resto Druid. He just kind of had a panic moment in the last pull, and we're kind of getting situated for the next one because these Soul Storms from the Portal Guardians are just insane. I don't really know what to talk about here at this point. Noting the overall really quick, Warriors are broken. They are definitely like A tier or S tier right now. Without their 4 set they pump, with their 4 set they will pump, without any set they pump. I did like a 19 or a 20 pug gambit the other day, and there was 2 warriors in the group. One had 2 set, one had 0 set. They did like the same number of damage. So they're really good if you can ever get your hands on a Fury Warrior. And then Frost DKs. A Frost DK played well can do a lot of damage. A Frost DK not played well will not do a lot of damage. DKs bring a strong toolkit. Again, he does have 4-piece semi-carrying him, but typically he sits around anywhere between like 13 and 16k overall, which is pretty good, especially on inspiring week, because I can't do crazy pulls like I normally do because we need to get kick still. And then of course, like I mentioned before, the Shadow Priest doesn't have set and mainly here to get purges and dispels, and that's pretty much it. And like good single target damage. Hopefully with the 4 set that'll improve. If you ever see a Shadow Priest in queue who has high IO, just know that they've definitely had to work for it. There's other classes like no shade or flame to Marksman Hunters, but Marksman Hunters have had a really easy time pushing IO because they just do wicked amount of damage. If you see a high Shadow Priest IO, pick them up. They might not be half bad. These guys, as soon as you enter combat with them, well, before you enter combat with them, they'll have a massive shield on them that can be purged. When I said like Priest is here for purges, that's what I meant. If you're Horde and you have Blood Elves in your group, Arcane Torrent works here, but you don't want to use them all because it's an AoE. So make sure you're assigning like 1 per pull, because there's Bone Magi in almost every pull you do here in this wing, the Altars of Agony. This next pull is crazy scary. For anyone who's done this on a high key or a high fortified knows that this pull will wreck. So what we're going to do is we're going to MC. I know it's not efficient to have 2 target cleave, but our Soul Binder needs to die and it needs to be kicked. the Necrotic Bolt volley is what typically kills groups. People normally think it's going to be the Soulstorm, but the Necrotic Bolt and volleys, what it does is it applies a healing absorb to your entire group, and on high fortified keys, it's a pretty nutty like absorption. So the Soulstorm will kill you, but it's because of the healing absorb. So unless your healer has really good burst healing, like a revival maybe from a Mistweaver, nothing else will really do much here. Look at our HPS right now though. 15k from the Resto Druid, 8k from our DK, 8k from our Shadow Priest, and then I'm only doing 5k, but still, like a 20, what is that math? Like a 30k HPS pull for 2 targets. That's spook for sure. My group used to opt to go left, but I found that with the relics, personally as a tank, I really struggle with, especially with more melee in my group. If it was just me, it would be one thing, but with having to get curse dispels and having to dodge the knockbacks, as well as dodging it made it just really difficult, and I felt just uncomfortable the whole time. So this platform is a little bit easier. I feel like you have a little bit more space because there's less mobs on either side. What I mean by that is on the other platform, there's 4 mobs per side with a couple spirits. So it just feels like you have a little bit tighter space to work with. Where on this platform, it's a little bit more open. Bone Maguses, especially if you have good kicks, and once you roll you have reduced cooldown on kick. It feels good to be able to kind of chain this big boy into the other Bone Maguses on the side. And that's the route we are choosing to do, because we skip those mobs back in the Chamber of Conquest, if you remember, in Xav the Unfallen's wing. So making sure that we're getting kicks here, making sure that we're interrupting those Bone Spears. Bone Spears will one-shot, Grave Spikes tickle. If the Bone Spear is going at your tank, or if it's going at you as a Guardian Druid, you don't necessarily have to kick. Like this one's going at me, it doesn't matter, it gets off. It takes me down to half health, but again, I had nothing up for that. I had no Frenzied, I had no Survival, I had no Bark Skin. It just did half my health. I popped Frenzied Regen. We're looking really good. And now we're going to pull the other side as well. We're going to get Purge from our Priest. And I think Breath is still rolling, so that's why our DK is actually doing decent damage on 2 targets at the start. But I think it eventually falls off. So that's why we do this platform. I've seen people do the other platform this way as well. I just feel very uncomfortable now with the with more melee. If it was more range, it would be fine because I'd be the only one having to dodge. But with a lot of people in melee with like different curses, mostly I had a bad experience in a 15 early season where it was and it was 5 melee. It was a melee healer, 3 melee DPS on myself, and like 2 of our melee DPS got knocked off. One of our other guys got feared into a side pack. I got stunned, and I'm just like never doing this again. And I probably won't for the rest of the season. So, but I like this red a lot. I think it's a little bit over 100. I think it's like 100.7%, but that's obviously pretty much perfect. I might be able to drop 1 soul. Maybe. We'll see. I'll have to go back and look at the route. This pull, same thing. The Soul Binder needs to die first. Soul Bolt, the Necrotic Bolt volley is the priority kick. Typically, I handle that in my group. I set focus. It's going to always be the second cast, and then it's every 15 seconds. So a melee or a tank can typically handle all of them. And then Bone Spear needs to be kicked. And then you want to make sure that you're also just dodging the knockback and the curse. Well, the curse you need to dispel, but if you don't have a dispel, that player who has it should try to stay to the outside if they're a range. If they're melee, just obviously don't stand in it. So going up to Koltharok, 95.9%, so we're 4% off. So we're good on percent. We still have that pack before the first boss. We have 10 minutes basically to kill 2 bosses, 1 trash pull. Something a lot of groups I think forget about is, or like some people don't realize, is like cooldown management and tracking in a key, and like looking at a timer consistently throughout the key to understand like how many more cooldowns you have. So this is a bad example here. I mean, maybe it's not the worst example, but you have to think like here, okay, I have 10 minutes left. You know, I have, you know, this cooldown up. I can like obviously like use it on pull, but actually I'll probably talk about this later, but after this boss at the last trash pull, I end up having to decide, do I want to use Incarn for the start of boss? Do I want to use it twice on boss, or on a trash pull and then once on boss, because I only get 2 more uses of it. And I end up choosing to use it on the trash pull and then having it once on boss later into the fight, once I feel like I'm going to be out of CDs, because Reaping Scythe hits really hard. As a DPS player, always going throughout the key, just knowing like, okay, I have X amount of more uses. I should try to optimize that. Sitting on cooldowns for a long period of time means you have less uses in the key. And if you're not using your cooldowns effectively, that's why people don't time. That's why sometimes people get walled, is because they feel like they need to sit on cooldowns, and popping cooldowns as more often will typically yield to higher DPS and more consistency throughout a key. So just a little tangent there. This boss, for a fortified boss, trucked us. I think we ended up having 2 dots. There seems to be a bug with these hands, is that I've had this happen a few times. The hands are like disappearing sometimes randomly, like early, like they'll go down, and then as the players are running out, one of the hand sets will disappear. Really, really strange. I think that happens once in this fight. Also, no, I think that's the only bug right now. It's just the disappearing hands. Sometimes players are in the hands and like their soul will still run out. I don't know if that's because they're right on the edge and your soul doesn't necessarily spawn underneath you. It spawns like within a yard. And if it spawns like right outside of the hands, it doesn't get grabbed. I don't DPS often enough to really know exactly. I typically just stand here and hit thrash. So what you saw me do there is I have a necklace that is giving me agility procs, and the proc is that small little golden orb. So going to pick it up was good. I think this is when it happened. Let me try to back this up. So as you can see, our warrior's in, I think he's in the hand. It's kind of hard to see. He's in the hand, but his soul spawns over here. Sorry, I need to figure this out. Yeah, our warrior died here because of this. His soul spawned underneath the boss. It didn't even spawn in the hands. Despite him, like, even if he wasn't in it, he was next to it, so there's still a chance for it to go into the hands, but it legit spawned under the boss. So we had a death there. Luckily, we had 3 battle reses available, so we used one to get him up. Only problem is, healer's like here, so we have to start playing fairly defensively. AMS goes out. We still have Icebound Fortitude. We don't really have much else defensively. Like, we don't have Disperse or anything. So I'm going to probably try it. I don't remember if I off-heal this next set, but we end up losing a DPS here as well. So if you are, like, that's another reason I like to play Rested Druid, is because during this draw soul cast, you have about a 5-second window to rejuve Wild Growth, and then Swiftmend someone if they're low, and then go back into bear form before he autos you. We lost the DPS. We opt not to res him, 3%. What he's going to do actually is release immediately and go up and start RP. There is about a 30-second-ish, 45-second RP window you have to complete from the point where you kill Koltharok to get to Mordretha. But if you have someone die and release, they can go up right away and kind of fast track that RP time. But luckily, it didn't really matter as much because we still have some trash to do. And this is what I was talking about, the cooldown thing, is that I'm looking at the timer. I'm like, all right, it's 6 minutes. We get which means I can basically get 2 full incarns off still, possibly 3. So I'm going to use it on this trash pull. It'll come up a little bit into Mordretha, and if for some reason the fight goes on for years, and like maybe we lose a DPS or 2, I'll eventually have a second. I'll have one last incarn to finish off the boss, fingers crossed. So that's what I meant kind of by thinking through CDs and thinking through like how many uses. I could have held for the start of boss, I could have held for Lust, but that meant that I would have had one less incarn, which meant that I would have had that much less damage. Plus it's Fortified week and the shit needs to die. So as you can see, I'm doing like 28k DPS right now. That's not like the most absurd DPS I've seen from a Guardian Druid, but on 3 targets, it's not too bad. Not too bad at all. We're trying to drag over to boss, so our, I forgot why, our DK was like, hey, can we start dragging over? And I was like, sure, why not? I don't see a reason why I can't. So that's why we did that. I don't know if it was for like trying to keep up breath, but he just popped breath now, so I don't know what that was for. Reaping Scythe is the big tank buster here. I have a Mordretha boss guide video. It's a little bit older now, but I think it still checks out. It just doesn't have, obviously, like the relics, because it's either from early season 2 or late season 1 with Prideful. I don't remember. I couldn't be bothered to look, but it's out there. It's still pretty accurate. I talk about where to position the boss. I talk about when to use cooldowns in this fight as a Guardian. So I'll link that maybe up. If I remember, I'll link it up in the far corner of this video so you can check that out. So Reaping Scythe is the big thing here. There is one really, really scary overlap, and it's the first overlap right after you phase her, where she does like a Grasping Rift, she's manifesting ads, she does Reaping Scythe, all at the same time. Plus there are the contenders out, which are the dudes who like do the swirls and they blow up for a lot of damage. And you might get clipped by that, you're getting sucked, there's debuffs out, you're getting hit by a tank frontal, so that's probably the scariest time. I'll point it out though in a second. So we phase at 50. When you hit her, when she hits 50%, no matter what she's doing, she's gonna stop and just cast like to go into phase 2. Reaping Scythe is something you typically always want to have mitigation up for. Warriors can spell reflect it. If you have a really mega Chad DPS warrior, they can taunt between autos, spell reflect the Reaping Scythe, and then the tank can taunt back. Our warriors, we've talked about it, he's just not comfortable doing it yet, and we didn't want to throw the key. So it can get a pretty big damage. I remember, I forgot who what video I saw that in, but it was one of the top ranked warrior dudes. So he's out there changing lives. So that was, I didn't even point out the overlap. My bad, guys. I am so sorry. Let's see. This overlap here. So it's right after cows. It's right after first set of cows and Dark Dev. And then she's going to cast Rift, Manifest Death, and then these contenders come out, and then Reaping Scythe. So this is typically when you want to use your biggest defensive. So your shield walls, your Guardian of Ancient Kings, Brewmasters don't have defensives, your metas, and your survival instincts. Those are all really good to use here. Obviously, like meta, you can just fell dev, but you want to be as tanky as possible for just any reason you need to get hit by more things than you need to. After that, it's pretty easy. It's just a dance of like dodge swirls. You're going to get gripped here, but no ads. And then you're going to get a Dark Dev, then a Reaping Scythe, then ad spawns with no grip, as well as cows. I think right here, our priest. So if you see this is funny as fuck. Our priest life gripped our Resto Druid through the beam because he was trying to be clutch and it didn't work. So our Resto Druid is way off on the left-hand side here, if you can see that. He's casting Wild Growths. Reaping Scythe is coming out, and then Dark Dev is pointing at him. So he baited it this way. He is, I think, he's trying to get to the left here. I don't think he would make it if I'm now looking back at this. I don't think he would make it. He should have ran around probably this way, like to his left. The priest grips him through the beam, so instead of getting like pushed back and out of the beam, he was gripped through, so he took multiple ticks after, like, we looked at the death log afterwards, and priest definitely being toxic here. We could have battle resed him. We don't, because fight's at 2%. So that is our top 21 timed, 2.5 minutes left. Not the cleanest run. Again, it's such a weird time of the season because not everyone has 4-set, and it feels weird making content about videos about like having 4-set, because like I know I'm talking to people who definitely don't have 4-set because they haven't gotten lucky. I got fairly lucky. My raid team is stacked with druids, hunters, and mages, and a lot of our hunters and druids took tier in their vault. So like I went from having like 1-set to 4-set like overnight. And I know there's obviously a lot of people who just spend time pugging and they're waiting for shit to drop out of their vault. So if you're watching this and you don't have 4-set, just know that it's going to come eventually. The creation catalyst opens up in a few weeks. You obviously have more weeks of tier. Raid finders wings are going to continue opening up. Bosses are going to be easier and easier. Obviously, like, there's a lot of power gain from, you know, conduits and item level, and obviously other people having tier. So if you don't have tier, just know that it's eventually going to come. Don't get like caught up in, you know, not being able to complete higher keys just because you don't have tier sets. Now, of course, there are people doing way higher than 21s currently because they all have 4-set in their group, even the healer, all of the DPS plus tank. So it's this weird line to kind of balance. So while I might be doing a lot of damage in this key, like my DPS necessarily weren't. So I'm just ranting at this point. So I'm going to end the video. So thanks so much for watching. I hope this helped. I hope you learned something from the video, or I just hope you enjoyed my commentary overall. So thanks so much for the support and the love. Hope you guys are staying happy, healthy, and I will catch you all in the next one. Take care.